morning, world. I'm Steve Rao, the host of Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. And today I greet you from Durham, North Carolina, as I'm in transit to another meeting. So I'm going to open up with my monologue, but we welcome you from wherever you are in the world to this wonderful show where we talk about global affairs, innovation, a post-COVID world, a disruptive and turbulent world politically, economically, as we deal with recession, inflation, war in Ukraine, and the rise of authoritarianism and dictatorship all around the world. But today, I want to begin my monologue on the State of the Union. The talk of the night is that Joseph R. Biden does seem that he will be running again for re-election to the White House. A feisty, energetic Biden came out swinging last night as he ended his remarks that the State of the Union was strong because of the American people, because of our resilience of bouncing back and bouncing forward. Despite much heckling from Republicans who actually were being shushed by the Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, Biden kept going on, addressing his infrastructure plan, the ARP plan, touting the bipartisan gun reform legislation, and highlighting his focus on the cancer moonshot, invoking emotion when he talked about cancer survivors, also getting emotional when he talked about Tyre Nichols, with Tyre Nichols' mother in the audience, as a president who's lost 2 children. We did see emotion in the president's eyes, and in my opinion, he did look rather presidential, really acting more like the commander-in-chief, trying to bring our nation together. Some takeaways for me from the State of the Union is, number one, he's running again. Number two, how divided our Congress is. This is probably the new norm now of heckling and booing and shouting out like Marjorie Taylor Greene, "You're a liar." Is this the new normal for our politics? Apparently it is. President Donald Trump delivered his response, calling Joe Biden the most corrupt president in the history of our country. Interesting coming from a president who's been impeached and being under investigation by the Department of Justice. However, I think the final takeaway and the most important takeaway is with no doubt that President Biden will be running again for the White House at the age of 82 years old. If he does complete a second term, he'll be 86, and he is going to be the oldest president to ever serve in the White House as our commander-in-chief and president. Sarah Huckabee Sanders' response was expected to be much more valiant, much more resilient, but was really just kind of a play to the Republican base. She is the youngest governor and former press secretary for former President Trump, and basically said that attacked Joe Biden's spending on money, attacked him on inflation, and also said that the woke and kind of liberal progressive movements are hurting America. It was an interesting talk, and it's good to have a young governor in Arkansas. But we'll be talking about this. But folks, according to Joe Biden, the State of the Union is strong. Joe Biden is running again for the White House. And I tell you, he was as scrappy and as energetic as I have ever seen him, maybe in his 60-year career in Washington. At the age of 51, perhaps it made me go for a run this morning saying, hey, I'm a young 51 years old. So here we go today. Let's get started. Mark Lee, come on out. And I'm going to head out home and then come back on the show. But real quickly, just insights about the State of the Union before we bring in the other guests.
No, looking forward to bringing in the other guests. I did not actually watch the State of the Union. Had other things going on. I'm sure that some of our other guests did watch it. I know that actually it was supposed to have a meeting, and the meeting was actually postponed because people were glued to the State of the Union, and they were actually involved with certain HBCU communities and certain other kinds of organizations around the Greensboro and I want to say the Durham area, and maybe even some other areas around North Carolina. But from what I heard, I definitely heard that it was, as you described it, very feisty, a lot of contentious talk and a lot of kind of things of you would expect it maybe a basketball game or things along those lines, because we just had the Duke Carolina game, and it did seem like a lot of the kind of barbs that you would see thrown by maybe the Carolina players or the Duke players against each other, much in the way that they did this past weekend, and all in that kind of space. So yes, politics has definitely become a very contentious sport, and it isn't just on one side. I do know that in the past there have been times that AOC has yelled down certain things that she didn't like. As a matter of fact, I believe there was some of that went on when Elian was not given was thrown off of a certain committee. I believe it was the Foreign Affairs Committee, and all in that space. So it's definitely something that has happened in the past and continues to happen. I would say that it's been happening over the last several years under several presidents and all in that kind of space. But definitely, I did hear him talk about infrastructure, heard him talk about a number of other issues, including things that were going on with police reform and things in that space that I know a lot of people are concerned about. As I've said before on this show, a lot of times people are very much concerned about economics and, of course, what's going on with medical care and things in that space. So in that same line, and if it's all right with you, I'm going to bring along one of our main guests.
And I'm going to be back.
Other folks as well. But
I'll be back in about 30. I'll be back in about 35 to 40 minutes. Thank you, guys.
No problem. Yep, I do want to bring on Carlin Maddox, and of course, I'll bring on other folks as well. But Carlin Maddox has written an amazing book about another epidemic that is facing our country. I know we talk about COVID and all in that number, but I have had relatives that have dealt with Alzheimer's and dementia, and I did not realize until I was looking at some of your bio the amount of numbers that are affected by this particular epidemic disease and everything. I think that in the media sheet that I got from you is something like 20 million people that are affected by some form of Alzheimer's. And I also know that you said that it isn't just a old person's disease, even though that is what some people think. And I know that even if we were to go back to the president's talk, there have been times that people have wondered about his own mental faculties and things in that space and everything in that kind of way. And I do know there have been attacks on whether he does have some early set or not early set kind of things in that space. And if I can add to that, I know that a running joke that many people will say when they forget something or are absent-minded is that people are having quote unquote early timers, because they will say that it is not just that old man's disease, but when they are having that moment of that kind of dementia or whatever, or absent-mindedness, and they are a younger person. And one of the things that I was surprised to learn was that, like I said, it's not just an old person's disease, but there are people that are young that have it as well, and that it is impacting a lot of the lady population as well. But definitely glad to have you here with us, Carlin. And if you could share some of your insights. I know that art, and I am a big fan of art as well, because art is something that my dad has been involved in for a number of years, and he still has a lot of his faculties and is not having any kind of situation of that, knock on wood, and all of that, because he's very active in his life, even at the early 80s. I want to say he's around the same age as our president and all in that kind of space. But I was just wondering your take on how you came about this battle. I know that you are a fellow journalist, having worked at the St. Petersburg Times and all of that, but then your life lately has been dedicated to your work in Alzheimer's, partially because of what your wife went through. But if you can share some of that story for our audience, I'm sure that they would love to hear it. I just kind of reflected on some of it.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. While you're just talking about the numbers there, before I get into our story, just to put this into a perspective, there's about 6.5 million people who've been diagnosed with Alzheimer's in the States. Alzheimer's is a form of dementia. It happens to be the largest form of dementia. But when you include the volunteer caregivers, that is the primary family caregivers who are taking care of loved ones with Alzheimer's, you're up to about 22, 23 million people being affected directly by this. If you put that in terms of population, Alzheimer's would be the 5th or 6th largest state in the country, behind California, Texas, Florida, New York, and then the state of Alzheimer's would have that kind of a population. But in terms of getting into our story particularly, my wife was diagnosed in 1997 with what's called early onset Alzheimer's. She had just turned 50 3 weeks prior to this diagnosis. So she was quite young with this. And if I had heard of Alzheimer's or was even aware of it, I became aware very quickly. And when we got the diagnosis, it was very hard to deal with. Our world was not turned upside down. Our world imploded before us. The day that we got the diagnosis, we went home, and Martha and I had a good long cry. Martha, just to give a little perspective on Martha, you were talking about politics earlier. She had been on our city council in St. Petersburg back in the mid 80s for 6 years. And the year before that, she ran, before she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, she ran for an open state in the Florida State Legislature and lost that by 20 votes, which that disappointed us at the time. But afterwards, in hindsight, I was very glad she was not elected. But anyway, when we got this news and we had this long cry, Martha looked straight at me and she said, "I do not want to tell a soul. I don't want to tell my parents. I don't want to tell our children. I certainly don't want to tell our friends." That just gives an indication of how deep the stigma was with mental disability in those days, which I call sort of the dark ages of Alzheimer's. But it's still very much a stigma in many people's minds, and they don't know how to deal with someone who has Alzheimer's or is very, very forgetful, or just whatever the behavior is that comes out of having this disease. So as we talked, there was one person that Martha was willing to talk with, and that was a retired minister who had been good friends with Martha before Martha and I married, but he did marry us and baptized a couple of our kids, and his name was Lacey. And she said, I'm willing to talk to Lacey about this. And so I called Lacey that day, and he came the next day. Lacey was a big hulk of a man. He was like 6'4", 250, 260 pounds. And when he came into the house, Martha and I were on the couch, and he was on a chair opposite us. And we did not beat around the bush. I just said, "Lacey, we've asked you to come here because Martha had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's." And he just slumped in his chair. He shrunk in his chair. And he nodded at me and just wanted to swap places with me, and we did. And put his big arm around Martha, and we all had another cry at that point. And he then said, after we all collected ourselves, he said, "I have a friend up in Kentucky." We were down in Florida. "I have a friend up in Kentucky, a sister, Elaine Prevale, who's with the Sisters of Loretta community there. And I send a lot of my friends there who are in the midst of one crisis or another. She probably has the best gift of discernment of any person I have met. And I would just encourage you to think about going to visit with her. I don't know what you would come out with, but I suspect it would be very meaningful." And so after Lacey left, Martha and I talked about it, and I got on the telephone and called and arranged a visit for us. And we went up there 3 weeks after Martha had gotten her diagnosis. That would be so her diagnosis was in September of 97. So it'd be in October that we went up to Kentucky to visit with this sister Elaine. And we were there for about a week, and it was just a wonderful week. It was just away from our whole scene, our whole setting, just helping us process as best we could what we had been told. And we did a lot of walking around. They had 800 acres of woods and pasture land and lakes and ponds and the like. And And but the time with Sister Elaine was just very meaningful. We didn't do a lot of talking. She let us. I mean, she let us do most of the talking. And Martha, I certainly grew to be attracted to Sister Elaine, and I think Martha was as well. And there were just several things, several insights she shared with us that were very meaningful to us. I mean, one of the first things she told us, she said, you might want to understand the difference between, excuse me, between being willful and being willing. And I had no idea what she meant. I was owning and running a business magazine here in the Tampa Bay area. That was a very willful proposition, activity. Martha had been into politics. And so neither one of us understood what she meant. She pointed us to a book and to look at, and I read that, and I still didn't understand what she was talking about. I'm sorry, got a little cough here. So that got us to thinking, what was she meaning? Well, I began to realize much of my life I'd been very stubborn, and Martha had been very stubborn, but we didn't come to any kind of full realization of that. I mean, most of the situations where we were up against a wall in something in our lives together, we just oftentimes just lowered our head and bulled our way through it, or somehow we came to some resolution of whatever that problem was. But we were up against a problem that we did not see a way through and did not see a resolution to. I mean, just if anybody is familiar with Alzheimer's, they know that it is, so to date, is an incurable disease. And there have been a lot of attempts at trying to find a cure, a medical cure, but so far it's been unsuccessful. There's been some improvement on helping to delay the onset of the symptoms, but not to actually cure the disease or even to manage it to any great degree.
No. And Carla, along those same lines, I definitely want to bring in some of my other panelists and everything. I was just wondering, how are we doing? Because I know one of the things that Nick, one of the founders of this network, talks about is education. And I kind of alluded to it earlier, but how do you feel that we are doing in the sense of education and even educating people about how to deal with it? Should they have to face Alzheimer's and all in that kind of style of what's going on and everything? Because the education system starts hopefully at a very young age, but it goes all the way for some people up to college, but definitely through all of the grade school. And I was just wondering, do you think that we're doing enough to make sure that kids and others are educated with what to do? Because I know a lot of times people, when there are Alzheimer's patients or Alzheimer's in their family or even dementia, they don't always know what to do. And I know that sometimes people will have visits from relatives that are not there in the sense of who they're talking to and things of that nature. Because I know that I definitely had a great aunt that went through that. And sometimes they won't even recognize some of the own people in their own family, but they might have memories pulled back from past folks that were around and all in that space. So, and I know that one of the things that you showed on your media kit was a art picture that was done, and it looked like you were thinking that was a self-portrait. So I do know that art has also played an important role in the way that you and Martha dealt with this. But I'd love to hear your own thoughts and reflections. And Lee and others may have questions as well. And then, of course, we'll get to other things around the world.
In terms of education, there are a lot more caregiver guidebooks out there today than there were back in 1997. I think the sort of the granddaddy of the guidebooks, which was around then, is called the 36-hour day, and it's been updated through the years, as I understand. I haven't read it recently, so that would be one place to go. You obviously need to get to a neurologist and not just to a general practitioner in terms of understanding what to do. And oftentimes the neurologist may or may not know of a good support group for the caregiver as well as for the one who's been diagnosed. I asked our neurologist back then if he knew of one. He said, I know of one, but I would encourage you that it might not be healthy for you, because most of them are dealing at a very late stage of this disease, and it may depress you more than it would be of value to you. But the Alzheimer's Association and something called Us Against Alzheimer's are very good resources to get to find out local chapters and to see about local support groups. I know there's a hospital here in St. Petersburg that has a very strong support group and outreach with Alzheimer's and dementia. So there may be a hospital in their area. I mean, but one of the things I did, I just started reading. And it was not just in reading in terms of Alzheimer's, but I was reading that, but anything that seemed to be tangential, anything that could seem to be able to contribute to what I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I started off looking for, well, we're going to beat Alzheimer's. I want to find out how we can beat Alzheimer's, but I got beat down by that process pretty quick. But nonetheless, many of the books that I read and gave me some valuable insights. One of the things I did, I guess I don't know why I did, but I do know why I did. I started keeping a journal, and it was not at that time for, quote, spiritual reasons. It was because I had so much information coming at me, medical, emotional, psychological, mental, so much information coming at me. I just had to write it down so I could refer to it later as I went forward. And so I would tell someone that talk to your closest friends, talk to the local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. You will find, probably as we found, that there were a number of Martha's friends who did not know quite how to deal with her. And so they just dropped to the side. I mean, it was not mean or whatever else. They just were at a loss on how to deal with someone who was, initially Martha did not lose an ability to speak, or was not losing her memory real bad, but just things were a little askew. The first time I began to wonder about what was going on, did not know, and did not have any idea what was going on, was a year before Martha was diagnosed, which would be in probably July or August of 1996. She was running, as I said, for an open seat in the Florida State Legislature. And she was at the most important campaign event then called the Tiger Bay Club here. And she was one of the 4 candidates who were there speaking. I'd seen Martha in that situation many times before when she ran for city council or in other situations. And she had always been very cool, calm, and collected, had her answers, could be able to respond directly and the like. On this day, Mark, she had to ask for every question to be repeated. And then when she responded to the question, her answers were just askew 10 to 15 degrees off. Did not make sense to me. Most of them did not. We got home and I asked Martha, I said, what was going on, Martha? And she didn't know what I was talking about. She said, well, I thought everything went fine. and that was probably the most significant reason why she lost the race, because of that day.
Well, and along those
So
same lines, yeah, along those same lines, Colin, I don't think that Lee and others may have questions for you as well. But earlier, Steve was talking about politics, and I do agree that from what I heard, and like I said, I didn't watch it all, but I have seen clips that it did look like Joe was being feisty Joe, and all in that sense, meaning President Biden. But there have been times in the past that he has done what you just described as well. And I know that there have been people that have speculated as to whether he is suffering from some of those early stages and whether he should even be considering running for another term or anything in that space. And I was just wondering, as an outsider, and I don't know your political affiliations and everything, but as an outsider watching and everything, is that a concern that you have as an advocate for Alzheimer's and everything? Because I know that he is one of the oldest presidents, but I mean, if it's him against Trump, there would not be both of them are definitely in that 80s category. And there have been times that there have been folks that have wondered about even the mental stability and mental faculties of former President Trump as well. But I'm just wondering your reflections on this and even the political aspect of it when you have heard these kind of things thrown, and sometimes they might be thrown as political barbs. And but there are also things that are going on. We all know that President Biden has a stutter, and that can add to what goes on as well. But I'm just wondering your take on those kind of aspects.
Well, someone who is this distant from the president or former President Trump, Mark, it is a real mistake to be drawing quick conclusions and sharp reactions, thinking that you know what's going on with someone who you don't know. And I mean, even Martha was 50 when she was diagnosed. I was 52. Our 3 children were still in high school and college. I was forgetting things at that point. I'm forgetting things more at this point in my life. I'm 77 now. I mean, I'm not trying to dance around your question, but it's a real mistake to start trying to draw conclusions just from what you're seeing on TV and the like. And I'll just leave it at that.
No, that makes sense. Lee, you've heard some of the comments. I
Yeah.
know we'll get to other things, but I didn't know if you had any.
If you don't mind, a couple things. One is, first, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure meeting you. And
Thank you.
I'm sorry what y'all went through. And you mentioned before that it's not curable. Are there things that a person can do to reduce the risk, whether diet, exercise, things to stimulate the brain, like jigsaw puzzles, reading, learning?
The thing that I've came across just about 6 months ago, I'll say in the last year, there was a doctor who had written a book, and his specialty was Alzheimer's and dementia, and he's with the Cleveland Clinic. And there were two things that I remember coming out of hearing him and looking at that book was to get your exercise in, do your exercise, but also focus on what he calls the Mediterranean diet. And I'm not totally sure what the Mediterranean diet is, but he said that there had been studies and research along those lines that were showing that they were very helpful in terms of just keeping the brain fresh and refreshed. And so those, in terms of being an advocate for Alzheimer's and those with caregivers dealing with patients with Alzheimer's, those were the most tangible things that I've heard. I've heard things across the whole arc, but coming from somebody who had that kind of medical history, that kind of medical training, that was good to hear that you could. It did not mean that it was a guarantee, but the research was showing that it did help delay any kind of onset of memory loss. Another thing that lot of people said, well, was it genetic for Martha? And there's a gene called APOE4, I think, that indicates the prevalence or the prevalence of getting Alzheimer's. Well, Martha did not have that. She was diagnosed, or just they checked that, and she did not have that. So genetics is also not a guarantee that you will come down with something like Alzheimer's. So I hope that gives you a response. Those are things we could talk about a lot of things, but
Hey, Colin, along those same lines, I know that some people have, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, have seen their parents and or their grandparents or other relatives that have faced Alzheimer's that have, talked to the folks that have passed on, talked to folks that are not around. And one of the advices that I've always heard was, not to challenge that. If they are having a whole conversation with maybe a grandparent that has passed on, or even relatives that have gone on or are remembering you from another age and things of that space, not to challenge it, but to kind of roll with it. And I was just wondering your advice for those that are facing folks that have Alzheimer's or any of the other forms of dementia. Because like I said, that is one of the things that I remember being told was that, they might say that they are, still talking to their mother, and maybe the mother has gone 5 or 10 or even 15 or 20 years ago, and everything in that space, and there's nobody else in the room. But one of the advice that I was always heard was don't challenge that and everything. But I was just wondering your take on it.
I basically would agree with that, Mark. It took me a while to figure that out because Martha would make some statements that I knew were just wrong, flat wrong, and I would try to correct her. And we would get tangled up in an argument. And I finally began to understand that I needed to step into Martha's world. She was in a different world from me. And I just needed to learn how to step into that world. But I think of when our middle child, Rachel, talked to me one time. She said, Daddy, I'm not connecting with Mommy. I can't have these conversations with her and whatever else. And I don't remember telling Rachel this. She reminded me that I told her this some years later. I said, well, Rachel, you just need to step into your mother's world. And as you describe it, roll with it and just go with the flow in terms of wherever Martha wanted to go with it. Do that. And just don't be concerned, and just know that is a behavior that you just got to recognize and try to. The whole point is to try to de-stress situations as much as you can for yourself, as well as for, in my case, for Martha, for my wife. And that was a very good insights that I began to develop over time.
You got any questions?
Well, actually, I've had some experience in this area, Mark, because my mom had that disease. And what it was progressively degenerate over a period of time, like 8 years or something like that before she passed away. They forget your name, they forget you, they forget how to drive. They drive. How we found out, she drove to the mall and then that she always goes to, and then goes, I don't know how to get back home. I'm completely lost. So the drugs are now starting to come out that slow down the progression of these diseases. And they've been fast tracked by the FDA. So there's more treatments available today than there was 8 years ago in terms of that. But when it comes back to education, Mark, what I'm saying is that our kids, if we bring them into elementary school, teach them pharmacology, teach them science about this stuff, develop your leaders in science in elementary school, then by the time they get to college and things like that, they'll be able to find, because we've already basically figured out what the the problem is, but they haven't figured out the solution, they'll be able to conquer things like Alzheimer's. In the meantime, what Carlin said was pretty eye-awakening. 20 million people of dementia. That's the whole state of Florida having dementia or Alzheimer's disease. But guess what? It's going to get worse. Do you know why? We have an aging population. If you saw the State of Union address, it looked like a nursing home. Okay. And it's going to get worse. Now, there was a theory that chess players, and Sasha will love this one, if you played chess and you engaged yourself, that would slow down or maybe even stop the progression. Actually, Arnold Denker was an advocate of that. But then when he was in his 90s, he actually got Alzheimer's disease. In other words, it might or it might not. There's nothing proven or not about that theory. But what they say is, well, you don't run across chess players that have Alzheimer's disease. Of course not, because you got to memorize all these stupid openings. And if you're playing in a tournament and you forget, you're going to start losing very quickly. So, it'll be picked up quite rapidly. But honestly, the research has been scant. The
Nick?
treatments are coming out slow. And so we're going to be faced with an ever aging population as baby boomers get older, and that could just drag down the entire health system in the United States. Except this, nursing home.
I'm sorry, Nick.
Not covered by Medicare. Remember this: if you have to go to a nursing home, Medicare ain't gonna give you a dime. So you got to be really. You better have your own nursing home coverage because they don't cover that. Yelly.
Nick, there's an expression about the brain: use it or lose it. Are people spending too much time watching TV and activities that don't stimulate the brain?
Yeah.
Well, that's actually one of the questions I was going to ask
It's quite
Carlin.
possible. It's like I said, it's a theory out there. At least
That's one of the
among
questions I was going to
chess
ask
world.
Carlin, because I know that Carlin,
Maybe to encourage people
like I
to
alluded
chess.
to earlier, he had talked about the art and the importance of painting to his wife and everything. So before we get to some other world issues and everything that I did say we were going to do that, I was expecting Steve back. But before we get to that, Carlin, can you talk about the importance of your wife being engaged and being engaged? I know one of the things she was engaged in was artwork, but I don't know what other kind of way she was staying active in order to hopefully slow the progression of the disease. Like you said, it is one that doesn't have really a cure and all, but it does seem like the artwork was something that relieved it to some degree.
Yeah. Well, as a journalist, let me step back to something Nick said and correct it. Those with Alzheimer's in this country are estimated to be around 6.5 million or so, Nick. What I was referring to, the 20 million plus, it was those with Alzheimer's and plus the caregivers taking care of those with Alzheimer's. So that would be 22, 23 million people in this country, including those with Alzheimer's and their caregivers, just so the audience is not.
So it's 6.5 million. Okay.
In terms of what happened with Martha's art, Martha was not artistic. She had never really done art in the 25 years that we had been married at that point. Our sister-in-law, KK, came to Martha one day, and Martha really loved KK, and said, "Martha, I'm doing a watercolor painting class, and would you like to join me?" And the only reason I think Martha did it was because she liked and wanted to be with KK. But Martha got into this watercolor painting class, and it was just an amazing kind of thing. She really became engaged. Until that point, this was about 2 years after her diagnosis. From the time of the diagnosis until that point, Martha's confidence had just gone through the floor, and it just stayed in the floor. And Martha had always been a very confident person, very energetic person, much more energetic than I am. But when she got into the art, she became engaged. She became confident. Her teacher displayed some of Martha's art out on St. Petersburg Beach. KK and Martha had their own art show at KK's house with family and friends coming over and oohing and awing, and that was just helping Martha's confidence immensely. And that was just a wonderful sight to behold. Her interest in art, I mean, the distinctive thing about Martha's art was that the coloration of it. Her teacher came to me one day and said, "Carlin, I do not know where this coloration is coming from. I cannot teach that. It cannot be taught." And it was just an amazing thing. You can find that on my website, find some of the artwork on my website, www.carlinmaddux, CarlenMaddux.com, under About. I think that's where it is, and see some of the art. It just really brought Martha out in a way. I mean, I remember one time we went out to a craft shop to get some materials, and she started bossing me around like she had in the old days. And it was just great to feel that and to see that, and to tell me, I need this and I need that and whatever. And that was just a wonderful experience.
Yeah,
Now, what I've seen since our experience, I've seen other people find the same thing there, but they also find the same thing with music and singing and dancing, that it just old songs that come back to them, old abilities come back to them, and just once it triggers something. I don't know what it does, but anyway, in our situation, Martha's interest in art lasted 2, maybe 3 years, and then began to fade away.
Yeah.
And by that time, she was beginning to lose her ability to talk. It's not completely, but her ability to talk. Her memory was fading pretty significantly. But that was just a wonderful phase that we went through with this.
I'm sorry, Carla, when you say your memory, there's short-term and long-term, or one versus more than the other?
Well, ultimately, Lee, total memory went. But probably the short term. I mean, she remembered who I was. She remembered the children, remembered her parents and the like. But just in terms of what we did yesterday, was just an escape from her. I know that one of the tests that the neurologist put Martha through before she was as she was being diagnosed was to ask her, "Who's the president of the United States? I want you to start with 100, subtract by 7, and go all the way down as far as you can, 193, 86, and the like." And she didn't get very far with that. So I think most of the things I read say that the short-term memory goes more quickly than the longer-term memory recesses do.
Appreciate that, Carlin. Like I said, definitely want to get to some of the other things. I actually want to ask Sasha, as we pivot a little bit to what's going on in Ukraine and Russia. I did see that Zelensky was holding talks with the United Kingdom Prime Minister amid those fresh Russian assaults, and there is some speculation as to what's going on with those assaults. And actually, Putin has been implicated in another incident, but that's from back in a few years back. But it looks like he's been implicated totally in the 2014 downing of that Malaysian passenger jet that had killed 298 people. So it looks like he was definitely said that he was involved in that kind of horrible action as well. But I just wanted your take on some of the things that have been taking place there in Ukraine and all in that space, because those are the two things that I did see, in addition to a Russian nationalist mercenary, Igor Menkachev, dying after being shot at close range. So it does look like one of those Russian nationalists has been taken out as well. But that was some of the things that I was seeing in the world news from the Ukrainian standpoint. There is actually something in the drug world that involves New Zealand, and I may get to that or may not, but I was just wondering your take on what's taking place there in Russia. So, Sasha, it's on you.
Well, this has nothing to do with Alzheimer's. I just absolutely hurt and offended by what Putin and his cohorts are doing in Ukraine. I mean, I don't know quite how to relate this to Alzheimer's or dementia or anything else, and this is just my private concerns. And but I'm trying to sometimes put myself into Putin's shoes, and he's telling the Russian people that this is for the mother country, and we're trying to recover the mother country. But from my perspective, and I think many of our perspectives, it's just an abysmal, just horrible kind of thing that's going on there. And the sooner that it can be resolved, the better. But I'm afraid we're just digging a deeper hole. I don't know if that's going the direction that you're wanting to take.
No,
this.
I was actually asking Sasha, and I didn't know if Sasha had any comments on the things that I was referring to and everything in the sense of that Russian nationalist, as well as Putin recently being implicated in that Malaysian passenger jet that took place back in 2014. So, Sasha, any news or thoughts that you have about the current actions that are taking place there in Ukraine, as the Ukrainians are definitely being valiant in their fight back against Russia?
No, it's an amazing thing in terms of the size of the country, comparing the size of the countries, and apparently the difference in military preparation between the two countries. It looks to me, as an outside observer, is just to be an amazing kind of thing that's going on with the Ukrainians, and with all the losses that they have, with all the destruction that's going on in their country. They are a symbol for me, and I think for many Americans, that this is what it means to defend your country and to defend your form of democracy. The other thing that is interesting to me is that Zelensky is beginning to ferret out the corruption within his own government, and so I certainly, I don't know all the ins and outs, but I certainly hope at one day soon, that Ukraine can join NATO and the EU and be considered part of that whole democratic base. But I'm sure you've got experts here who are more insightful into all this than I am. But yes.
Sasha?
Yes, well, it's becoming obvious that this war between Russia and Ukraine will be decided on the battlefield. Forget about all this peace proposals and everything else. It's not going to work. Both sides are too far apart. There is absolutely no possible until one side will be decisively beaten. There is nothing going to happen. Interestingly enough, President Zelensky is in London. He was met at the airport by English Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and was taken to 10 Downing Street. He will address Parliament today, and he will have an audience with King Charles. And that's for Zelensky. Where is Mr. Putin? He's hiding in his bunker, but it's just a matter of time when he will be killed, most likely by his own people, and that will probably resolve the war very quickly once that happens.
I can definitely see that being the case and everything. One of the other things that I was seeing in the news, and I don't know if anybody's got any comments on that, but we do have a drug war that is going on, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And apparently over in the small island of New Zealand, they recovered 3.2 tons of cocaine floating in the Pacific Ocean. And they say that that is worth $500 million. So that's quite a bit of cocaine that they found off that island and all in that space or that island country. But definitely, is this just another example of the war on drugs not being as effective, or is it just a accidental case of it actually being effective because apparently they found it and I don't know why it's floating? Maybe there was some pirate action going on, but I don't know if anybody has any thoughts, because that does seem like a lot of cocaine that's out there. I know there are some countries, including some parts of Canada, that are talking about legalizing.
Well, who knew it floats? Right?
Mark, are you frozen?
Maybe I'm frozen, but go ahead and answer.
I just real quick, we had a balloon coming over the United States. They were having drugs going through the water now, unattended to.
Yeah.
Another way of delivering this stuff.
We've got kind of wonder what's going on in general, because like I said, we had the balloon float through. We've got drugs floating over there in New Zealand. So exactly where are these satellites that are supposed to be finding a lot of these things doing anyway? Because there's a lot of things that just seem to be unexplained, as Dan likes.
Yeah, the biggest unexplained is how this thing. I
Go
guess
ahead.
Mark will be back in a few minutes.
Let me, while Mark is going wherever Mark is going, sort of draw this back into my conversation. I mean, in terms of what I see with drugs and the use of drugs, we're all trying to find some way to overcome the pain of what we are going through. And some people obviously get deep into drugs. One of the practices that the Sister Lane that I mentioned up in Kentucky encouraged us to look into was the practice of meditation. And that, and I began to discover that a disease like Alzheimer's, as well as many, many crises, have some basic spiritual component to them, and emotional component, and we're trying to, the whole sense is, how do I get rid of the pain of all this? And if you go through 17 years of living with Alzheimer's, you begin to realize there's a lot of pain and a lot of toing and froing and tug of war and whatever else. But when Sister Elaine mentioned checking out meditation, I had never done that, and my particular religion had never been into meditation. We got back to St. Petersburg after a visit there, and I asked our friend Lacey if he was familiar with anything about meditation, and I was surprised that he did, and he pointed us to a Benedictine monk by the name of Father John Main, who had been practicing this and sharing this with many, many people. And his intention was to get it outside of the monastic walls into just the community at large. And so Martha and I did begin to practice meditation. We would sit side by side. I would hold her hand, and I didn't know if she would remember the word, but I began to practice using that word. And it over a period of time, I began to see Martha's anxiety level begin to diminish as a result of using this practice. And as a result, my anxiety level began to diminish. And that was a valuable tool for us. And it seems to me it would be whatever is causing you enough pain to get into drugs and the like, that might be a good option to even consider and think about.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know we're getting to.
Carlin, I'm sorry, Mark, you mentioned meditation and spirituality. So does prayer or belief in a higher being help someone deal with these things?
It did us, Lee. And it's not a matter of, well, I believe that there's a God up here and we're down here, but just being drawn into a greater presence than our own situation. And that's what meditation over time helped me to do. to begin to realize that there is a presence beyond us, a healing presence beyond us that helped us get through this. Was Martha cured? No, but in many aspects, I think I and our children, and I think Martha was healed through not necessarily a consciousness of this higher presence, but it really drew us out of ourselves, out of the pain of our situation, and helped us get through the day. I
That's
don't know if
probably
that
good
answers
advice
your
for
question.
everybody.
Yeah, that's very great advice for everybody. And I know we're getting ready to close out, but I was just going to bring up two other quick news stories, or three actually, just in passing, and we can talk about them on tomorrow. But it does look like Kim Jong-un is putting his daughter front and center during those lavish military events that they do. And there are a lot of speculation that she may be the one that is going to succeed, and that there may be a succession happening sooner versus later, because I know that there was some question as to where he was, but then he did appear for this military activity that they do on a regular basis. But there is some speculation that she's going to be the one to take over in that space. And a Missouri man who killed four despite his innocent claims was executed, and all in that kind of way. So I know that Missouri had been in the news because of that. And last but not least, and this is one of those more lighthearted, but not too lighthearted stories and everything, but you were talking about things that get lost, and we were talking about the drugs earlier. But over there in California, there was 700 pounds of acorns found stuffed by a woodpecker inside the walls of a California home. How you can hear how you cannot hear the squirrel doing all of that time, and how they can get that much of the acorns into that wall is beyond me. But then again, I wasn't there, but it seems to me that you would be hearing Woody Woodpecker roaming around and storing all of those things in that particular space and time. But that's just my observation. I'm just going like, that's a lot.
Somebody had a lot of time in their hands.
Yeah,
Amazing.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
It's a long, cold winter. Welcome back, Steve.
Yeah, welcome back, Steve, and we'll give you the closeout and everything. We've had a very interesting and enlightening conversation, mostly around Alzheimer's. We did get to a few other issues as well, but definitely we learned a lot from Carlin, and definitely it was an insightful conversation. But I know that you usually do the opening and the closeout, so I'll turn it to you for the
I
closeout.
want to thank Carl. I was in transit today, but thank you for being with us and sharing your stories. And we want to do whatever we can on the show to provide support mechanisms and networks for Alzheimer's and these terrible diseases. So whatever we can do to support that. My main closeout is we're going to be talking, this tomorrow a little bit more about the State of the Union, diving into, pretty clear now Joe Biden will run again for the White House. And what does that mean for what I do believe will be a Trump-Biden rematch in 2024. I am confident that he will win the nomination for the Republican Party, and I think it'll be Donald Trump and Joe again, an 80-year-old running against a 78-year-old for the White House. So the polling does have Trump. I know the Republicans are going to be happy, but the recent polling does show Joe Biden winning again, re-election against Trump. Although we have to go see whether the economy would factor in. But is it right for heckling and stuff during a president, regardless of who's in the White House, a Democrat or Republican? Definitely a new period of American politics where disruption, rancor, and just anger and division is across all political spectrums. But we'll be talking about the president's address tomorrow, and we want to thank you all for being with us today on Pod and Roku TV. We'll be back tomorrow for another edition. Thank you all. Be safe wherever you are. And we'll be talking about the State of the Union tomorrow. Thank you.
Sounds great. And if Colin wants to stick around after this lovely outro banner, we can definitely have some after conversation and all. But definitely there is great programming that is continuing on the network. I know that our show around the metaverse will be actually airing later on today at 6. It sometimes is there on Tuesdays, but it's actually moving to Wednesday. So that'll be going on. And Grant McGaugh will be doing his Follow the Brand show at 7. And there are a number of other great shows that are coming your way as well, including, of course, Sasha's Modern Investment, which will be coming our way at 1 o'clock. So definitely look forward to that. And there are great programs that are right here on Pod TV, podtv.tv. And of course, you can find it on Pod TV Live on your Roku channels and all in that way. But there are various ways that you can catch it. But right now, we're getting ready to get on out of here, as Steve said. And we'll be back here on tomorrow on Thursday. But hope everybody's going to have a great day and a productive day. But right now, let's get on out of here.
Y'all good.